Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Now you are, but you haven't been given the news quiz yet.
No, I know. I'm all relaxed because I know it's your turn to start us off.
And I'm going to start us off with not one quiz, actually, but two. The first is not a news quiz. The first quiz was actually prepared by a commenter on YouTube under the YouTube version of our show. You may remember last week at the end of the show, I said, hey, if you like either of us, smash the like button. And you added, and if you like both of us, smash it twice. And I may have said, yeah, great idea. And then this guy said on YouTube, Mickey, you do realize what happens if I hit the like button twice, don't you?
No.
The second one negates the first. The second one is an, oh, I changed my mind. I don't like this. So the new guidance is if you like both of us, click 3 times the like button or 5 or 7 or 9 or 11 or whatever, or 1 even, not 2. Not 2, Mickey. But you know, can I just say it makes a difference? It really does. The YouTube algorithm goes into high gear. So we do encourage this. Seriously.
Well, it's good because everything else in my world is falling apart. So if our listeners are rising, that's...
Are we going to get to talk about that part of your life in the regular podcast or only...
My life falling apart?
Yeah.
I think it's a subtle theme in the regular podcast and then it all pours out in the Parrot room.
Okay. So this will be like pregame. Okay. So the actual news quiz is complicated. Name 2 Serbs known as the Joker sometimes who have had a good week. And how does what one of them said in the preceding week or two offer a good segue to discussing the Ukraine war?
Well, the first one is Djokovic.
That's one of them.
I guess he broke the record for Grand Slam wins
by a man. Yes. So who was the second?
That was at France.
It was the French Open. Rafa Nadal could not play. He's the guy. He surpassed Nadal.
You want a second Serb, the center for the Denver Nuggets.
Excellent. I'm not sure if he's technically the center, but you got it.
Oh, so he's a big guy.
Big guy. His name is, if you pronounce the J like a J, he's Jokic, and then the other one is Djokovic. Anyway, they both have been called the Joker, and so you got that. You did well. That's good.
Okay, well,
but what about the?
What's in it for me?
No, it all depends on the bonus question. What did one of them say in the preceding week or two that is a good segue to discussing the Ukraine war?
It's time to settle all the family business.
Wow, that's amazing. No, he didn't, but it's still amazing. It's not bad. What he said was Kosovo is the heart of Serbia, which was controversial. He got a lot of flack for getting political. And here's the segue. So what's going on?
Which one said it?
Djokovic.
Oh. Well, they have the Battle of Worms there, or the Battle of the Crows, or something.
They do now, or
No, they did in 1300.
What was that? The Diet of Worms or something, or what?
No, that's not the Diet of Worms. The Battle of something. They lost the battle there that in a long time ago that they still remember as if it were yesterday.
Okay, but still, you're stalling. So here's the.
No, that's why they claim that Kosovo is the heart of Serbia.
I see. Okay. So anyway, the deal with Kosovo is that it is not, by many accounts, part of Serbia anymore. But there was a Serbian enclave, and there was tension between the Serbs in that enclave, an ethnically Serb enclave, and that was the context of his remark. NATO was actually acting on behalf of the Serbs at this point. But if you ask why is NATO occupying Kosovo in the first place, why are NATO troops there? That brings us to the Ukraine segue. In the 1990s, Bill Clinton said, I'm going to expand NATO. Russia didn't like it. He said, don't worry. It's a defensive alliance. It's there to help foster democracy in its member states and so on. No problem. In no time at all, he had actually used it to bomb Serbia in clear violation of international law. The situation there was that Kosovo, there was a separatist movement in Kosovo, which has a lot of ethnic Albanians. And we decided to intervene in that on behalf of the Albanians, saying there had been atrocities committed by the Serbs in repressing the movement. I'm sure there had been. There were also atrocities on the other side. I assume that we were right to think the Serb atrocities outnumbered the other ones. I don't know. But the point is, we didn't have the sanction of the Security Council. We couldn't get support from that. So we intervened. We bombed Serbia. And for that reason, it was not a legal intervention. And
I thought we were also pissed that they violated the so-called, I think it was the Rambouillet Accords. There's some accord that we forced them to sign, and it was a ridiculous accord because it gave NATO troops the right to roam Serbia at will. No nation would ever sign it.
I believe this was before any such thing had been signed.
Oh, this is before that?
I think it was. But anyway, because there's certainly a pretty close to consensus among international law people that this was illegal. And this, the segue is, this really stuck in Russia's craw. And by the way, we did things like bomb power grids in Serbia, civilian infrastructure, which now we call a war crime when Russia does it. Eventually, we kind of pried Kosovo away from Serbia. That was part, and then in 2008, when we in effect offered future NATO membership to Ukraine and Georgia, this was still a very, very much a live issue because we were in the process of kind of, I guess, recognizing Kosovo's independence. That was driving Russia crazy. And in fact, that was as much behind the conflict in Georgia in 2008 as the NATO Ukraine thing. Yeah.
I thought. What was I thinking? Never mind. Go ahead.
Okay.
I'll remember what I was thinking.
Anyway, this was one of the first of their grievances related to NATO expansion. It bothered them because it's like NATO is just deciding to attack someplace. It happens to be a Slavic country, an Orthodox Christian country, a country that Russia has had close ties to. So this deeply bothered them and has stuck.
I know what else I was going to do. This was, and the Clinton administration put out a bunch of palaver about how Kosovo is going to be a model of inter-ethnic harmony, and they're all going to learn how to live together, and we're going to foster democracy, and that was all bullshit. The ethnic enclaves stayed the ethnic enclaves. They still hate each other, et cetera, et cetera.
Clinton may have believed it, and I will say
it was very similar to the neocon utopia bullshit.
It was a little utopian, and I will say that NATO is now stepping in kind of on behalf of the Serbs. So they're I don't know, but anyway, it has turned out to be very kind of messy. And I will also say this is maybe the closest thing to something we've done that Russia would analogize to what they did in Ukraine. You had ethnic separatists in a country, and there were real ethnic separatists in eastern Ukraine. We intervened on their behalf in violation of international law and so on. So if Russia was going to point to one thing, this might be it. But anyway, that's the segue to the Ukraine war. That's our history lesson. Go ahead.
Well, there have been three indications that your worldview is getting way too crowded, Bob, for you to carve out a niche.
It doesn't feel like that. Go ahead.
We have Tucker Carlson, who said the reason they're going after Trump is neocon foreign policy. And I believe he talked about the provocations to Russia of dangling NATO membership to Ukraine. Robert Kennedy Jr. talks exactly the same way. In fact, Tucker Carlson and Robert Kennedy Jr. are very, very similar in this respect. Talks all about the NATO membership and how it angered Russia. And yes, Kennedy at least says Russia is they shouldn't have invaded. It was illegal. But look at the history. And then there was a huge article in the New Yorker, which I didn't read, basically making the same point. So how does Bob's cognitive empathy differ from Robert F. Kennedy?
My overall
Robert F.
worldview
Kennedy is the most empathetic. Tucker's a little wilder.
Yeah, I mean, my overall worldview differs from Tucker's a lot. I mean, I doubt he gives a shit about international law, whereas I do think it's really a grave breach of international law that Russia invaded, even though if we had had a half intelligent foreign policy for the previous 2 decades, it wouldn't have happened.
That's
It,
basically
but
what Robert Kennedy said.
yeah, I mean, the other thing is Tucker's like wrong to act as if, Trump stood firm against all these neocon adventures. I mean, at the end of the day, Trump caved again and again and again to the foreign policy establishment. He couldn't get us out of Afghanistan. He kept us in Syria. He was more belligerent in some respects than a lot of people in the establishment would have liked. He assassinated Soleimani and so on. So that part is kind of bullshit. Holding Trump up as any kind of a paragon of a restrainer foreign policy. But Kennedy, he's reasonably conversant, although I heard him on a podcast confidently asserting that 350,000 Ukrainians have died in this war. That just seems to me impossibly high. I think he tends to get his data in echo chambers.
He spouts a lot of facts like that with great certitude that are deeply suspect.
Yeah.
He was also just on Joe Rogan.
Oh, was he?
And I listened to that. The first 3/4 of it are all about vaccines, and you could skip them. The last 30 minutes are basically him giving his political pitch and saying his campaign's not about vaccines. So, but you know who gave him a fundraiser recently? I think maybe last night.
David Sachs?
Yes. What did you know?
Well, it's just the kind of question you would ask. I had heard that he had a Silicon Valley soiree. I hadn't heard.
That's almost as good as you getting Retsin as the secret ingredient for certs last week.
I will long glory in that. Yes, that was impressive. I gotta say.
This was impressive too, because Sachs is a DeSantis guy, I thought, and now he says Kennedy is his choice on the Democratic side. I don't know. If I were DeSantis, I wouldn't be too happy about that.
Maybe, but he had been on their podcast. Kennedy had been on the All In podcast, and I've heard, so it's not shocking.
More to the point, if Casey DeSantis is not happy with it, David Sachs's chances to be Secretary of State are diminished.
Wait, if who's not happy with it?
Casey DeSantis' wife.
Oh,
who is widely considered the power behind the throne.
You mean she's not happy about it, or you're saying if she's not?
No, if she is unhappy about this disloyalty of,
she's the one.
Well, she's the one you don't want to piss off. Yeah.
Well, we can get back to Ukraine, but as long as we're talking about domestic politics, have there been any big developments? I mean, Kennedy's numbers are staying high, and if anything, growing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the big story domestically, apart from the indictment, which I forget if we talked about it, but I have things to say. But the big story is that Kennedy's enjoying a moment, and will the momentum last? He's doing okay in the polls. DeSantis is doing not so good in the polls. But there was a New Hampshire poll out today that showed the PAC catching up to him, which is exactly what you don't want to happen.
What's the total number for the whole PAC, including him?
Oh, God, I forget. I think but he's at 13 and his nearest competitor is at 9. So that's like nothing.
Who's at 9?
I think it's Christie. I'm not sure.
Ooh.
Christie is also enjoying an unwarranted surge of popularity, despite the fact that his unfavorables are very high, thank God. People don't particularly like him. And Kennedy's favorables are incredibly high. So anyway, he basically has a realist or whatever, cognitive empathy, relatively skeptical of our Ukraine adventure.
Who does? You mean
Kennedy?
Kennedy, okay.
And he on domestic policy, he's like right out of the 60s. That's what was so disappointing to me, because he'd gone to the border and said sort of various anti-Biden things about how the border is out of control, completely right. But then when his pitch on Joe Rogan yesterday, it's all like, well, I want to be a unifier. We can do good for the poor and send them money, and we don't have to demonize illegals. And that's it was basically before the whole rethinking of liberalism that resulted in Bill Clinton. He went back to his father, who had the potential to certainly put the working class and the liberal elites together. But the content of it was, it's all a matter of resources. We're not giving money to the poor. We could give all this Ukraine money to the poor. And the problems with the poor, as we learned in the lessons of the 60s, are in part cultural. And you don't just solve them by throwing money at it. It's very similar to a message that I think Tucker gave. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Tucker winds up endorsing Robert Kennedy.
Right.
He's a lot closer to Robert Kennedy than he is to Trump, I think.
On domestic policy.
They're both populists who think the elite is conspiring against everybody else. That was the whole pitch of Robert F. Kennedy's thing. It lacked the essential ingredient. I think if you're going to unite, the right and the left, the working class, and enough of the suburban elites to win, it's going to be on Clinton principles, i.e., welfare reform, control. I think control the border. Do something about the family. Pay attention to the mainstream cultural values. It's going to be on that basis rather than Kennedy basis.
I'm just not sure how many voters share your fascination with the child tax credit. But I have a question.
Well, welfare reform was a big thing. If you remember, it was the centerpiece of Clinton's presidential run.
He
won.
That was a while ago.
It was also his biggest achievement. So
yeah.
No, I'm not pulling this. I'm not pulling this issue.
I think disco was a big thing then too, Mickey. Times changed.
I'm not pulling this issue from the fringes, Bob.
It's
the centerpiece of Reagan's campaign, centerpiece of Gingrich's campaign, centerpiece of Clinton's campaign.
The 80s. That's a good barometer of political moods.
Clinton did something to help solve the problem, which is always the death of an issue, right? But it's coming back.
Okay, keep talking that way. So is there a chance? I mean, who is the most likely person to take advantage on the Democratic side of what Kennedy is doing? So Kennedy's like establishing that Biden, it seems to me, is vulnerable. And who jumps in? I mean, see, what somebody could do is say, I'm jumping in to save you from RFK, the anti-vaxxer. How about that?
Well, they could do what RFK did to Gene McCarthy. Gene McCarthy showed the way, and then RFK jumped in.
Precisely. Who will that person be?
Good question. Interestingly, Sherrod Brown, your poster child, is in huge trouble in Ohio. There was a Selena Zito article that was claimed he was in trouble because he endorsed the tuition, Biden's tuition pause or whatever.
The tax credit or whatever.
The forgiveness.
The amnesty or whatever. The partial amnesty. Yeah. Because that goes mainly to affluent.
I don't think the working class is mortally offended by that. But he's running in a state that's very red now. Okay, it's like red. Yeah. And he's not red. And this guy Bernie Moreno, who is the likely Republican nominee, everybody says an excellent campaigner. Even J.D. Vance has said he's an excellent campaigner. Vance has endorsed him. Everybody's lining up behind him. He's in deep trouble. He might as well run for president. What the hell? He's like Joe Manchin. He's gonna lose anyway. You might as well go for the brass ring. So Manchin could be one of them. Newsom would be the most obvious one. He gave an interview with Hannity that everybody said was very good. So
somebody needs to have a talk with one of these kind of sober, responsible types in the Senate who no one would expect to jump in and just convince them like this is your moment. I mean, anyone can jump in and make a splash. The fact that you're not the type to do this to the party.
Who did you have in mind?
I was actually kind of thinking about Chris, what's his name in Connecticut? What is his last name?
Murphy? Well,
yeah. But I mean, that's what I mean. See how counter to type that would be playing? It's like, you'd be like, whoa, he would never do something like this. They need somebody who would never do something like this to do something like this. And then everybody would go, whoa, the race is wide open. This is crazy.
they would all do something like this. They all
No, they
want to be
wouldn't.
president.
No, they wouldn't. Not right now. Not while an incumbent has not bowed out.
Ro Khanna has been gunning for president all his life. Of course, he's going to do it at his first available.
He's going to do it this year.
If there's an opportunity,
but there won't be unless somebody does it. That's my point. I mean, there may
Kennedy
not be.
We premised the question on Kennedy creating the opportunity. The opportunity is obviously there. The other factor is the hot Biden summer that is coming, which is, the Democrats realize if they're going to get rid of Biden, they have to unleash the floodgates of scandal now. Okay, they can't wait until next year in the middle. They have to get rid of Biden now. And all of a sudden, all this info on the so-called supposed Biden crime family is coming out. And supposedly they're, in the summer, the inhibitions will be off and the deep state will be cooperating with the release of anti-Biden information, and with the goal of preventing him from running for re-election. That seems eminently doable.
Because they will be that afraid of Trump becoming the president. That's the logic. That they'll be like, Trump can beat Biden, so we got to get Biden off stage.
Well, yeah, the Democrats, the Democrats don't care just about beating Trump, as we've discovered. They also hate all Republicans, and they want Democrats to stay in power.
Well, right, but you were talking about the deep
not
state.
Not just a Trump question.
The deep state
they would do it even if DeSantis was the nominee. But go ahead.
Fine, but you were talking about the deep state. The deep state is the opposite. They don't care about parties. They don't care about Democrat or Republican. They just want American foreign policy to continue to be stupid. That's their goal. And so Trump scares them in a way. In other words, if Christie was going to be the president, they'd be fine. We don't care if Biden loses to him. Deep state doesn't care about that. They just want somebody who will reliably, use military force ill-advisedly.
Except, as you point out, A, Trump wasn't that strong against the neocons, and B, the entire Republican Party is at least half against the neocons. So any Republican they get, even DeSantis, who has a history of blobism, would be very circumscribed in what he could do in foreign policy, because the people who support DeSantis aren't going to go for military adventures. So I would think the Blob would be scared of them too.
I don't know about that. But I will say this. I would really like to see Christie and Trump on the debate stage together again.
I don't know. I'm Christie has never taken out Trump. Remember, he took out Marco Rubio.
Right. Well,
he's very
Rubio's
good. He's
not
very
there
good
now.
He's very good on stage. Actually, Rubio has completely gone to the border control side after sponsoring an amnesty. It's impressive. But Christie is very good when Trump isn't on stage with him. Let's see how he is when Trump is on stage. Yes, it will be fun to see that happen.
But wasn't he on stage? Wasn't he on stage with Trump?
He was, but he took out Rubio instead. He did Trump's work for him.
Right.
He was in a town hall recently where he wasn't on stage with Trump, and he did very well. He said, Trump is like a Seinfeld, watching Seinfeld reruns. We know what he's going to say. It's not quite as funny the second time around as it was the first time. I thought that was a pretty good line. But
the assumption that Christie cannot really get up there in the poll numbers to a point that scares Trump, I'm not sure that's a well-founded assumption. I'm not sure what the basis for that is. He didn't do great last time around. Well, that's because Trump was dominating. That was a different Trump.
This latest poll from New Hampshire would give some support to your view. He's getting a big media boost. But what does he stand for? What is Christie's vision for America other than Christie is in charge? There isn't any. That's my problem with the guy. I mean, he's all about, he's like Ron DeSantis without Ron DeSantis's ideology, of which there is one. So.
No, he has values. This is one example. He's in favor of traffic problems in Fort Lee.
Right, and he was in favor of amnesty. Those are two strikes on his record.
I'm not. I just don't know. I mean, how many of these guys have actual convictions? I don't know. They can manufacture. He'll have convictions in no time at all. Don't worry.
One of the things I was struck with, Tucker's pitch, and I watched the first 3 Tucker episodes on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
It is a populist pitch. The elites are screwing you. The elites are spending money, on the Ukraine war that could be spent in your neighborhood. Look at your roads, rural America. Your roads suck. There are Jersey barriers everywhere. He's right about that. There are Jersey barriers everywhere, and nobody seems to feel any urge or imperative to take them down. So, if Jersey barriers are the issue, Tucker wins. But it's very similar, but it's this crude money thing. And the problem, problems of America aren't going to be solved until we have the $113 billion we're spending on Ukraine spent on what Tucker wants it spent. The problems are deep and cultural, and they do not involve money. They involve the family. They involve society being pulled apart. And Tucker knows that. Okay, he's smart enough to know he is dumbing himself down. Okay, Robert Kennedy, I think, is not smart enough to know he says the same pitch with the money and it's all economistic. He's not smart enough to know that that doesn't work. I think that's the difference between.
Well, in other words, he does not agree with you on certain parts of ideology. That's what you mean by not smart enough, is he doesn't agree with Mickey.
Correct.
Okay. I just want to be clear.
That would be Mickey's definition of smart.
Yeah. So you finally watched the first episode of Tucker
The
on
point
Twitter.
is, Kennedy's a true believer, and I don't think Tucker is.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure how true a believer he is. I've always been suspicious of that on foreign policy.
Well,
so you watched the first episode. You finally watched the first episode of the Tucker thing. You agree it was a little unhinged?
I watched the first 3 episodes, Bob. There's a fourth one now. There's a fourth one now that I haven't seen, but there are 3.
You're ahead of me. But back to the first one, didn't he seem a little unhinged? I mean, we revisited him begging to be called an anti-Semite part last week. And he was begging for it.
I don't know. He said that Zelensky was friends with BlackRock. Is that necessarily anti-Semitic? I mean,
I thought it was the part where he called him rat-like, sweaty, shifty,
but he makes
persecutor of Christians. I think you put it all together. It's only a 10-minute show, Mickey. When you pack all that into a 10-minute show, come on.
I guess he's smart enough to know the resonance between all those things.
I think so.
He makes fun of Lindsey Graham's looks too. I mean, he's a looksist. What can I say?
But actually, the main thing you said, the most important part was what you said before that. He's smart enough to know. No, but look, at least he didn't spend all his time on that. There was the part where he said, we now know that the government is concealing the cadavers of space aliens.
Well, it's very interesting. I had read an article that didn't mention that it had this whistleblower who seemed very credible say we've recovered vessels of the aliens, but it didn't mention cadavers. And you would think they would, and that's because this whistleblower mentioned the cadavers in a later interview with some website. And then my follower, little Mickey, was right in pointing this out to us. And that does detract from the guy's credibility. I mean, not only because it's inherently less rational for the aliens to send actual aliens as opposed to probes, right? So it's just if you believe
anal probes.
Right, we don't expect the anal probe. So
it'd be AI, right? It's like it would be Chat GPT. If he said they were concealing the cadavers of GPT, that would be one thing, because presumably it would be AI. We now know that before a civilization gets to a point where it can send spacecraft off to other solar systems, the AI is already running the show, right? So anyway,
do we know that? I mean,
I'm half kidding, but not entirely. Anyway,
here's a crazy idea. What if the aliens, in fact, have a 2-tiered race system? They're the real aliens who are like super smart and big and blobby, and they don't travel, but they have a race of servants who are sort of miniature, who they put in the craft.
Kind of like, if they're just avatars? They're just deep fakes of the actual aliens.
Still makes no sense, because the AI presumably would run the spaceships just as well as the actual aliens that are there. So I agree that detracts from this whistleblower's credibility and Tucker's.
Yeah, but I mean, and just quickly, leave aside the cadaver part. He says that everything this whistleblower said, Tucker said, we now know, like for sure. He was emphatic. And this guy, the whistleblower, doesn't even claim to have seen the shit. He doesn't claim to have seen the spacecrafts. He doesn't claim to have seen the crafts. He says people he trusts told him. And now Tucker reads that and goes, well, then we know for sure. I've never met this guy who's saying some people told him some stuff, but whatever they told him, it must be true.
Well, he's hardly the first, TV, he's not a reporter anymore. He's a preacher or something, to say with certitude something that he's not certain about.
But this is kind of really going out on a limb. We're talking alien cadavers here, Mickey.
So what? I think it's a trivial sideshow.
This is not like saying Russia blew up the dam. This is which has about an equal probability of being true, I would say. But
we're saying Russia blew up the dam is much more relevant to today's politics than the UFOs. Except for this, you sent me to this crazy guy Troy, who has a long series about how there's an interlocking conspiracy of all these theories with theosophists and UFO people and people who believe that there's a ascended elite that knows all these things, and all these conspiracy sort of they all buy into all the conspiracies, and they're all part of an interlocking web, and the result is a threat to democracy. That's the part that I don't get.
I don't think.
And
look,
that guy is much more paranoid than any of the paranoids he's writing about.
I have a riposte. I have a devastating riposte, but why don't we save it to the Parrot?
Well, no, let's have the devastating report. We're on the topic.
Okay, I just forwarded you an email that had been forwarded to me that had that thread. But I didn't study up on the guy, but I read his thread enough to know what was interesting to me. And he wasn't, and you're overstating it. He wasn't, there's a vast conspiracy. He was saying two things. I mean, the main thing to me was he's a guy who had kept track, and I think this part is reliable, of people who had been on this UFO bandwagon for a long time.
Right.
And they included the two people who, two of the three people who wrote the original New York Times piece that brought all this stuff back to life several years ago. Now, that piece, I think, was solid because they also threw Helene Cooper, like a Pentagon correspondent or something, on that case. So she was she was part of the byline.
Right.
And I think the shit was solid. And I'm not saying it wouldn't have been without her. But those are, I didn't realize, like when we first heard about this whistleblower, it's like, and the piece about him is written by two former New York Times people. Okay, well, now we know they've been on the UFO bandwagon for a long time, which I didn't really realize. That was what was interesting to me. And that was the only reason I forwarded that thread. Then the guy did go on to say it is a trope in various kinds of anti-government rhetoric. I forget if he said on the right or left or both, that, they're concealing shit from us, and the UFO thing stuff works into that well. And I think he's right about that. Tucker's a perfect example. He's a perfect example. Well, that's what he's appealing to, is anti-government paranoia.
If you believe in one conspiracy, you're more likely to believe in another conspiracy. I agree. If you're an anti-vaxxer, if you believe in UFOs, you're more likely to believe that the vaccines are a plot by the drug companies. That I understand that. It's when he says, and therefore they're a grave threat to democracy. He does say that. He does say that. Read the whole thread.
And therefore they're a grave threat to democracy.
Yeah. He goes off the deep there. And what he doesn't say is this whistleblower, this current whistleblower that Tucker talked about, who seems so credible, yet does talk about cadavers, is he a theosophist who also believes in drug conspiracy? Is he part of this vast network?
The theosophy thing is wild. You know who was, if I understand theosophy, if I'm not mixing it up with something else, it was this guy, what is it? There's the Waldorf schools and the other kind
Rudolf
of schools.
Steiner, he was anthroposophy. Yeah. He replaced theosophy with a man-centered view, which was anthroposophy, I believe.
But he's in the theosophy lineage?
He's a spinoff. Yeah, I think. I have some friends who are part of that.
You know what the Waldorf schools give, like part of their philosophy is that you should give very young children the dolls they play with, like 2 years old, 3-year-old, should not have faces. They should not have faces.
Okay. They have a bunch of weird beliefs. But anyway, it's a weird group to include in this vast conspiracy. Anyway, we were talking about Tucker. Yes.
He's a fucking nut. Okay, we agree. Let's talk about Ukraine.
He seems to have bought the UFO Kool-Aid. Yes.
Oh, I don't know if he has. I don't give him that much respect. My point is just that when I said it's not like saying the Russians blew up the dam, it's another that doesn't convince people that you're crazy, right? This convinces people he's crazy, even though I think it's just reckless opportunism or something. You know, this guy we were talking to on Twitter that you mentioned did say, and he was a Tucker fan. He said, I think he's had a psychotic break after watching the first episode, and I don't think he has, but I think it was weird enough for non-crazy people to say, is he having a psychotic break? You watch the whole thing; it's fucking weird. The weird Zelensky shit.
What it is
There
weird.
are UFO cadavers. That's fucking weird.
It's a lot weirder than the stuff he was writing for the Daily Caller, and it wasn't exactly that he was restrained by the editors of the Daily Caller, since he owned and ran the Daily Caller. Nobody was restraining him, and yet his pieces were very respectable and nuanced. And this is all very unsubtle and a little crazier. And you wonder if I think he is being cynical about it, but the UFO thing, I think he actually believes, because the government has been more open about UFOs than it has been before. So there's
they could be real.
There's a trend there.
UFOs could be real. Sure. And there's interesting suggestive evidence. This David Fravor pilot, he's interesting.
Okay. But what it is to me is Tucker, he's sort of been forced by getting fired to carve an alternative to cable news. And his latest episode, which I didn't see, is all about how cable news is doomed. So presumably he is the wave of the future. And he might also decide the same thing about political parties. You know, we have these two parties, they're doomed. Time for a third alternative. I'm just saying there would be a harmonic convergence of his entire worldview if he either supported a third party run for president or mounted one himself.
Goes for the alien vote. See, that's what I mean. This is nuts. If you're well, it depends. If you just want to pick up 7% and cause a ruckus as an independent and swing the election, sure, go alien. But if you watched the video before this series of shows, the first thing he did after being fired at Fox, you go back and watch that video. That seems like he's paving the way for a third party run. It really does. But that was when I quit paying attention. So Ukraine. First of all, as long as we're talking about the dam, you know, I was listening to this Ben Rhodes, Tommy Vietor, progressive blob podcast, and like they're just asserting with complete confidence, pretty much, that Russia blew up the dam. And the more that the implications of it unfold, the more absurd it becomes, because these are like predictable implications. It's like when it first happened, people said, well, wait a second, couldn't this wind up depriving Crimea of the very water supply that Russia took over the dam in order to restore? Now that's happened. And now, last week I talked about various parts of the argument that this was to Russia's tactical advantage that made no sense whatsoever. Like, oh, it's going to stop a river crossing. No, it's when you still control the floodgates that you can stop a river crossing. Now what you're doing is redrawing the shorelines in a way that renders possibly obsolete those of your fortifications that weren't flooded by this, and many of them were. Plus, now it's turning out that the reservoir above the dam is getting so dry that it's opening up whole new possible lines of attack by Ukraine. Not now, but people are starting to say, like, wow, in a few weeks, they may be able to walk across this part. And it's just, everything about, the whole flood disproportionately affected Russia-controlled parts of Ukraine, not just Crimea. And that's a pain in the ass for them. Their soldiers are the ones that have to deal with this. They're the ones that have to help evacuate the civilians and everything. They're the ones whose fortifications are getting wiped out. It just makes...
Wait, they don't control the area below the dam. They just control the dam, right?
No, they control everything on the east side of the river below the dam. And that's got hit more heavily than the west side.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And then they control everything that was dependent on the reservoir, which includes some stuff to the west, but much more stuff to the east.
But surely the big story is the counteroffensive, not the dam. The dam was last week.
Yeah, but
this week we're talking about how the small towns the name of which I forget,
Fine.
are crumbling and opening up an avenue for a Russian advance.
I want to get to these small towns. That's exactly
Okay.
what I'm going to get to, actually.
Okay.
But but first, I just want to dwell on the fact that even in the wake of the Nord Stream, what should have been a debacle for all these people who said Russia did it, which no doubt includes Rhodes and Veeder. I'd have to check to be sure, but I'm betting that was the side they weighed in on. Even after any reasonable person realizes that no, Russia didn't do Nord Stream, even our own government is saying it. They're doing the exact same thing. Like, oh, catastrophe happens. The official thing is to blame Russia. If you think about it for 7 seconds, you realize it makes 0 sense for Russia to do it. And yet here we are stating with confidence that Russia did it. It's just, I just want to reflect on this, on something that's just close to madness.
When did our government acknowledge that Russia did not blow up the pipeline?
Well, they're the ones who first leaked. The Germans had evidence that Ukrainian divers did it. And months ago, the U.S. government, I'm pretty sure, leaked that it's looking like a Ukrainian authorized mission of 6 people did it. Then we learned a couple of weeks ago, and this is solid because the Washington Post, at least if you trust them to get this much right, which I'm sure they did, they say this is in the Discord documents that they have possession of, that a European government, European intelligence agency, warned the Biden administration in advance, before Nord Stream was blown up, that Ukraine was going to use a crew of 6 people to blow it up. And then independently, Germany investigated. Well, I don't know if it's totally independent, but anyway, that seems to mesh. And now the latest thing is that, and I think this is from the Discord documents too. I think that this could be a U.S. government leak, so it could be. It was in the Wall Street Journal, but once we got the report, Ukraine's going to blow up Nord Stream. We told Ukraine we didn't want them to blow up Nord Stream, and they did it anyway, according to this story, which raises a whole nother set of questions. But anyway, the U.S. government is definitely pushing, I think, and certainly not denying the evidence that Ukraine did it. Now, where was I?
You're about to get to the counteroffensive.
Okay, the counteroffensive. Oh, one more thing. I'm not saying Ukraine blew up the dam. There's a good YouTube video by a guy who does he's got a big audience from way back doing these kinds of how things blow up and various kinds of I think he may be a civil engineer. I don't know. A pretty convincing thing that the dam just collapsed. The video is titled why the Russians are responsible for the dam, but he just means dam blowing up, but he just means they didn't maintain it. He got satellite pictures, and the day before it collapses, a whole road on top of it, a segment of road, disappears. And he argues convincingly that that's a sign that the structural problems are approaching critical mass. Anyway, so yeah, those towns. So, I guess the segue is, months ago I said I'm worried that they're doing this offensive for political, much more than military reasons. In other words, they feel we're not going to keep supporting them and sending them the weapons they want if they don't show real progress on the ground, and they're doing this. I said, I think you should rethink it. Think about using all the troops that have now been trained and the equipment you've been given to play solid defense and maybe periodically assertive defense. You probe, fine. But I worry that not only could this fail at great human cost, but it could open the way down the road for Russia to even take Odessa, after which Ukraine would have no port. I worry that the same thing is happening within the war. Okay, and this gets us to those villages. So first of all, as people know, I mean, not many people are putting it like this, but the results of the offensive have been clearly disappointing to date. Doesn't mean they won't change. I mean, Ukraine hasn't committed nearly all of the force it has, but the initial probes have gotten less far than you'd hope. There have been significant losses of equipment and manpower. And the villages you're talking about are in this river valley. And when this happened, it's like right away, there was this kind of disaster that afflicted this one battalion where all this armor was blown up by Russia. There was a single photo showing 5 Bradleys. This is a place that's now referred to in Russia as Bradley Square. That 5 Bradley vehicles out of the 100 we sent them, like in a single picture, gone. And so that was like a PR disaster for Ukraine. It was right after that they decided to go for this series of villages. And on kind of mainly in pro Russia Twitter, people were saying like, this is kind of weird. This doesn't do them any good because these villages are first of all, they're very small villages. I think many of them had been abandoned.
Who went after them?
Ukraine.
Okay.
This is what Ukraine cites. This is what they can say. Hey, we've taken X, Y, Z, and A in this one place. A whole string of villages. This is their biggest, the thing that looks best of what they've done. But the people in Russia are like, they're not in a great place because they have failed to take the adjacent high ground. It's like when Russia went into Bakhmut, it's a low-lying city, but they took the adjacent high ground. And so it didn't turn into a liability. Ukraine, as of last night at least, had still not done that. And it looks like the soldiers there are absorbing some pretty punishing strikes. And they have not advanced further in days. And this is not a huge catastrophe. I just worry that, with that one PR disaster right out off the bat and this NATO summit coming up where Ukraine wants to be considered for membership, that maybe they felt we got to rack up some actual villages. We can rack these up. Well, yeah, you can, but anyway, the overall thing is, hasn't gone well. Could, and they're miles away from the actual defensive fortifications. Now, again, they have wisely withheld the great bulk of their forces, which you would not want to bring into play if you haven't gotten anywhere near the main entrenchments. But I think everyone. Well, let me give you. People are kind of, people on the pro-Ukraine side are kind of, saying, look, these things always are tough, and that's true. That's all true. But I want to play something Michael Kaufman, one of the most revered analysts, and he is very good. But he's, he's the guy I listen to the most. But he is pro-Ukraine. He was born in Ukraine, and he'll kind of try, if possible, not to egregiously violate Ukrainian talking points, not to the point of dishonesty. He doesn't say things he doesn't believe. But I just want to play this one. The interviewer had asked him, like, okay, so how's it going? We took all these Ukrainians and we trained up 9 brigades. And then there are 3 more that were trained for the war in Ukraine. And they have all this new equipment, this U.S. equipment and Western equipment. How's all that going? And so here's, if you can hear this, here's what he says.
At least the first week, and this is just an interpretation based on pretty limited evidence. So far, it's clear that the main advantage of the Western systems provided is the survivability, both of the platform and the degree to which they've shown to protect the crews and the men that they're carrying.
Okay, so what he's saying is, so far, the main advantage of sending them all these tanks and other armored vehicles is that when they get blown up, the soldiers have a better chance of surviving. Okay, but we didn't send them over there so that they could get blown up, and yet the soldiers wouldn't die. If you want the soldiers not to die, just don't do the offensive. Okay, and that's not.
You think he's putting the best face on it?
He's working hard. And look, you listen to the whole podcast. He gives you reasonably frank appraisal. I'm really not trying to pick on him. I'm just saying when they say, how are things going? He's like, let's start with the upside. It's like he's basically conceding that the main thing we know about these vehicles, 2 things: they're getting blown up, and the soldiers aren't faring as badly as they would if they were in other vehicles.
In the larger picture, why is this a bad thing? Ukraine, I think it wasn't just to appease the West, but there was also internal reluctance to go into negotiations until they try the counteroffensive. So they try the counteroffensive. They don't get very far. Putin gets a talking point to take into negotiations. So he can claim victory. So there'll be negotiations, and if the Ukraine does well, they'll get a little more. If they do worse, they'll get a little less. Who cares? I mean, the important thing is that there be negotiation, and then they get this thing settled.
Well, I think first of all, it's true that if Putin does well in fending this offensive off, given the fact that these troops trained in Europe, in NATO countries, given NATO, he can make a big deal out of that. He can say, we beat NATO, even though where he is now is well short of his professed goals. Remember, he said he was annexing 4 provinces. He doesn't even occupy all of any of them. So yeah, it helped. I guess that's an upside. But you want downside. First of all, the carnage. And by the way, I want to emphasize, the main loss of armor that's documented was that first day. But I have seen more loss since, and I just am not seeing the much on the other side of Russian vehicles being destroyed. But back to your question, there's the carnage. There's again, to me, this is kind of no win, because if they do push him as far back as they say they want to, if they declare a big victory, if Ukraine does, they're going to say, give us more arms and we'll go further. And eventually you worry about Putin being in a box where he gets desperate. At least I do. But you're asking about the other thing. What's so bad about just continuing this offensive? Well, first of all, remember, the great bulk of the forces have not been committed. And at this point, it looks like Ukraine is determined to commit them one way or the other. And I want to say again that you can imagine it playing out if these guys just get slaughtered, okay? And for whatever reason, Russia decides to do another mobilization. All these things are very contingent. It may not neatly culminate in the kind of negotiations you're talking about. It could well lead. Putin could well say, hey, I've got a lot of domestic support. There's a little unrest on the nationalist right because I haven't taken all of these 2 provinces. Let's keep it going. And he could well wind up taking not only that stuff, but Odessa, which again, this is.
And if they hadn't done the counteroffensive, then Putin would be. How does that lead to negotiations?
Putin, well, I think if you play assertive, first of all, how do you know Putin doesn't want to negotiate now? People assert that because they don't want to negotiate.
Bobby Kennedy said he does. What do I know?
I don't know how he knows that, but I certainly, all of these people in the Blob who say Putin doesn't want to negotiate, they're just making that up. They have no idea because nobody has said, do you want to seriously negotiate?
I thought Blinken, they're constantly probing and that nobody's in the mood to negotiate.
You know what Blinken's idea of offering to negotiate? I mean, what has Blinken said? What do we know? You know more than I do.
I don't know. I've seen stories. The White House advisors say neither side is in the mood to negotiate right now. The war has to play out for a little more.
That's because they don't want to be pushed to negotiate for whatever reason. They want to see this offensive through. So for all I know, he wants to negotiate now. But in any event, I mean, if with all of this force arrayed, you realize we now have overwhelming defense. You are going no further without another mobilization. Do you really want to do another mobilization? Politically, he'd rather not. And you do enough kind of probing attacks so that they are still, they're still hurting a little. And then you have to actually say it, not just pretend you said it. You have to actually say privately, do you want to negotiate? And then you'd know. But so far as I know, we have no way of knowing
that. I just think, unless they're going to rout Putin or Putin is going to take Kiev, it's going to be some sort of stalemate. And from the United States' perspective, it doesn't matter a whole lot how much of the Donbass Putin has or doesn't have. It's just one gets marred in these details. And
It's not the Donbass. Look, remember, first of all, I'm not so worried about Kiev. That's not considered. There's this concept of Nova Ruska, or however you say it in Russia, okay? And I think it comes from, I don't know how far back it goes, but the right-wing nationalists, at the beginning, they were saying, this is our goal. It includes Odessa. And if Ukraine loses Odessa, they don't have a port, okay, on the ocean. That's an economic problem.
Right.
And it includes Kharkiv, I think, up north. So, it just,
Putin made noises this week about making another stab at Kiev. So
yeah,
that's why I brought it up.
Again, I think in terms of what they actually possess, they'd rather have Odessa and Kharkiv than Kyiv. If he can use Kyiv to decapitate the government and have a puppet regime, sure, that was the original plan.
Anyway, I have my other question is Zelensky right in worrying about American support eroding? What would that look like? Is there any chance that an anti-war candidate, I guess Robert Kennedy would be that candidate, will actually, win and depose Biden? I guess it's like Gene McCarthy did with Lyndon Johnson, and that the Democratic Party will become anti-war. That really would threaten Zelensky, but I just don't see it happening.
Yeah,
I see every avatar on Twitter is the Ukrainian flag. Maybe that's fading a bit, but
I'd say never underestimate the power of the blob. I agree. So I agree with you, but there's got to be like a 5 or 10% chance that something will, from Zelensky's point of view, go horribly awry in American politics, and that's all the more reason not to see his forces decimated over the next three months. And look, it could work. I'm not saying we know that the offensive is going to fail, but there was this a Twitter thread or something by this guy Jack Watling, who's this military guy, highly respected by the mainstream Blob people. He does seem smart, but he said, "Look, this is a binary thing. Success is breaching the main defensive line, and not breaching it is failure." Okay, and we haven't gotten up to it yet, and we're taking, I think, heavier casualties than has been acknowledged.
It is an incredible opportunity for populists who want to meld right and left, that there is a war, not a necessary war, but a war that both chunks of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party don't like, and that it cuts across party lines. And you could come out against the war and steal a chunk of the Democratic and Republican parties, put it together with all your economic populist issues, and come out with a pretty big party. That's not an opportunity that people who want a left-right populism should ignore. Whatever they think about Ukraine, it's too big an opportunity.
What's your evidence that there's a lot of Democrats who don't like the war? I mean,
Bobby Kennedy. 20% in New Hampshire.
Yeah, but there's a lot of aspects of Bobby Kennedy. One is that he's not Joe Biden. I think that's a lot of those 20%. Who knows? He's saying a lot of things. He's saying, he's doing, just kind of vaguely, generally populist stuff that is inherently appealing. So I don't know.
I think you're right. We're not there yet, but you can see the beginnings of an opposition. It's not like the Vietnam War, where the California Democratic Party broke with Lyndon Johnson and came out against the Vietnam War, and that was a real sign that the floodgates were opening. You don't see that.
Oh, yeah, it's nothing like that. I mean, Americans aren't dying in this war in any appreciable number. Right. That's when Americans start actually caring about foreign policy, is when Americans start dying.
So we have a settlement that ends the war. I think they should have a settlement that ends the Trump indictment, and we have nothing to talk about. I've settled it all.
No, but speaking of Vietnam, I mean, in terms of things we can talk about in the Parrot room, Daniel Ellsberg died. We can talk about that.
Have we been talking for 50 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's the Elizabeth Gilbert.
Canceled her own book?
Canceled her own book.
Was that because she really knew it was a shitty book?
I doubt that was it. I doubt she got cold feet about publishing.
Did she erase all
except
copies?
in the sense that she didn't want to antagonize a lot of pro-Ukraine people.
Did she erase all copies so that?
No, she didn't rule out publishing it in the future, but she withdrew it from the publishing schedule because I guess it's a novel. It takes place in I think in the past, in the Soviet Union, and I suppose it depicts some Russians not unfavorably, and that's not allowed these days.
That's like a brilliant move. That's like she gets a huge round of publicity, and then she gets to do it later. It's like Jim Croce dying and not dying. I mean,
wait.
Everybody said Jim Croce dying was a brilliant career move because then everybody discovered his music and he became a hit. This is like getting that without actually dying.
Well, that's what what's his name said about what's his name. I'll remember by the Parrot room. He called suicide as a career move was the line. And he was referring about his friend, the novelist and essayist David Foster Wallace.
That's cruel. He was big before he died.
He was
huge, huge before he died.
Look, I don't think it was a career move, but the fact is that suicide, gives you your legacy a kind of mystique.
And with artificial intelligence, like with John Lennon, you can actually keep on producing after you're dead.
That was such a bullshit story. I'll talk about that in the Parrot room. What fucking bullshit? I mean, everybody knows now they can get publicity by saying, "Oh, an AI was involved."
Because they actually had a recording of John Lennon singing the song, and
it was the fucking recording. All they did is clean it up. It was recorded under noisy circumstances, and they got rid of the noise.
Okay.
I mean, they may have enhanced the voice, but they didn't give him a totally new song to sing. I'm sorry, but this is in the Nonzero newsletter today, and readers of
we should do an AI generated podcast where I could take the week off and you can pretend that AI has generated what I would say because I'm pretty predictable at this point.
You are, but we should fake it, right? It should be a fake of a deep fake. I mean, it should really be us. It's a fake deep fake.
Okay. If we can pull it off, we should do that.
We can do
that. I have things we have to talk about. I have a question about AI that I want to ask. There's this impending sort of Plan B Iran deal. Informal, doesn't have to go through the Senate. Yeah. Everybody freezes. I didn't understand what was in it for Iran except a bunch of money, but you can talk about that.
But it's a bunch of money, and they need money because the sanctions have been on so long.
Okay.
I mean, it's multiple billions. That's not nothing when you've been sanctioned to death.
There is a little bit of Epstein news.
Good.
Wait, I'm looking at the wrong sheet here.
Does that mean I hope you're not retracting the Epstein news?
No.
No. I want to say, I have something to say about that. I think, yeah.
I have,
and relatedly about the rationalist community.
Yeah. I have more to say about this indictment of Trump. So I'm sorry.
No, that's good.
I've boned up on it, and I want to.
No, that's good. I went so far as listening to to a podcast about it. So.
I have one joke about the LA Country Club, which is where they're holding the United States Open, even as we speak.
Yeah, and we got today and yesterday. Brooks Koepka is paired with Rory McIlroy.
Yeah.
Doesn't get better than that if you know the history. Oh yeah, and maybe
right.
I'll update us on the Lib situation. I know
we have. I have news about what the Saudis' next conquest is going to be, or has already been. There's. I have an objection to this popular vote compact that the left is so hot for, where states pledge to cast their electoral votes for the winner of the popular vote, and they're getting close to the critical mass where this actually might take effect. I have the Blob is close to the mother lode of pro-immigration arguments, which I will outline.
You had me at Blob, and you lost me at immigration. But
okay, sorry. Well, it's like a shit sandwich for you, but
Fucking
sorry
roller
about that.
coaster listening to you.
And we're just all getting by on the first few days of the post Chris Licht era at CNN. So
We talked about that a little last week. Now,
I'm not actually going to talk about that. That was just a joke.
Okay, the Unabomber died, right?
Oh, and the pardon. Who's going to pardon Trump and why? Anyway, go ahead.
Okay, Unabomber died. I want to talk about that. Ed Fredkin died, whom I wrote about in my first book, Three Scientists and Their Gods.
Yeah, he was great. He was important.
He was great.
He said the universe was a computer.
He did. He said it before Stephen Wolfram, and it's not totally clear that Stephen Wolfram gave him all the credit he was due, but what do I know? I do know that Ed used to complain that Stephen Wolfram was not giving him the credit he was due.
Is Wolfram still alive?
Oh, yeah. He's super young. He was super young when Ed was. He's like 3 decades younger.
Well, then he wins.
We'll see about that.
Okay.
The night is young. No, the whole theory of this kind of digital physics stuff, it's still very much a minority, somewhat speculative enterprise. It's not like anybody's going to win. We don't know. Jury's out. Kind of like string theory, but less famous. So, okay, that's plenty. Daniel Ellsberg, we got a lot to... maybe talk slightly about the show. What's the show?
Silo. Which I diligently watched.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I diligently watched and I mostly enjoyed, but go ahead.
Man, we got so much. We're going to have to put some of this off for
what else? Don't worry.
Two Harvard things. Is Harvard responsible for the Unabomber going crazy? And relatedly, is the CIA responsible for him going crazy?
Oh, good. I'm interested in that.
But then this other Harvard-related thing having to do with the Inuit. Is that how you pronounce what we used to call Eskimos? Is it Inuit?
I don't know. Inuit or Inuit.
And it's really interesting. And this is related to the Harvard thing, so we'll bring it up. Interesting documentary I saw over... Anyway, let's go. It'll all be there in the Parrot room.
I'm worried about filling the time, but you think we'll have no problem?
Oh, God. No, it's the opposite. How are we going to get any sleep?
Okay.
Terrible.
Eventually it will end. It'll be chock full of stuff.
Eventually it'll all end. But I don't want to end on a downer. So let's say instead, folks, remember, if you like both of us, click like 111 times. If you like either of us, just once. Okay?
Okay.
All right.
See you in the Parrot room. I've cleaned the Parrot, by the way.
Oh, good. I was going to
I gave it a bath, especially under the arms is a little difficult, but see you there.
Okay.